No, I don't know. I have it here. Yeah.
We are ready. Are we ready? IT team?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Dear friends, I'm very happy to see you all here in the morning. After a great discussion we have had yesterday after the panel and the panel discussion, I am so happy to start with the first day, official first day. And today we will have as a first speaker Professor Ivan Šimonović. For me, the most important for this conference, the most important actually, that Professor Šimonović is a professor at the University of Zagreb. He was the vice rector and he was the vice dean of law school. But in reality, he was, his function was Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights of the United Nations from 2010, and he was 6 years in this position. Today he is with us in many roles, but one of the most important roles is, as I said already, Professor of the University of Zagreb, and as a very important member of Inter-University Center of Dubrovnik, and as a member of Croatian Association of Club of Rome. Professor Šimonović, please, what is yours? Thank you.
I thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I will be addressing today responsibility to protect from mass atrocities. Do you hear me loud and clear? Good.
Here in the morning.
Just 1 second, please. We have double sound.
Yeah.
Okay, you can continue, please.
Thank you. Now, when explaining the title, let me start with mass atrocities. Mass atrocities include genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing. 3 of those crimes are crimes under international humanitarian law and international criminal law: genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Ethnic cleansing was an addition included in the outcome document of the World Conference, UN World Conference in 2005, which was consensually adopted. And afterwards, there was a separate resolution of the General Assembly guaranteeing that there would be protection from mass atrocities, including genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. Sometimes it's wrongly interpreted that because they are not defined as specific crimes, that ethnic cleansing is not a crime. It is a crime. It's impossible to commit ethnic cleansing without being involved either in war crimes or crimes against humanity. So it's a sort of a composite crime. And of course, if ethnic cleansing reaches a certain threshold, ethnic cleansing transforms into genocide itself. Now, what was the value added of this outcome document and of prohibiting mass atrocities and granting to populations protection from atrocity crimes. Some obligations previously already existed under international criminal law and international humanitarian law. There is a common Article 3 of Geneva Conventions that asks all member states to react if there are grave breaches of Geneva Conventions. Also, there are obligations of states under Genocide Convention to protect population from genocide. So some legal obligations were pre-existing. Secondly, it's quite clear that there is a moral obligation to protect populations from atrocity crimes, and that these obligations preceded this outcome document and General Assembly resolution. Even the Charter of the United Nations itself, when addressing in preamble the reasons for establishing the United Nations, clearly states that it is intention to prevent future populations from scourge of war and so on, that hurt so many people, and to save future generations from this terrible ordeal. What is new and what was added value of this outcome document and of this General Assembly's resolution is additional political obligation. It created, by being consensually adopted document, a political obligations of all states to involve in prevention of atrocity crimes. So how can states do that? How can they show their commitment to act upon the obligations? First, and we call it in the terminology of responsibility to protect, first pillar of responsibility to protect, it's obligation of each and every state to protect populations on its territory from atrocity crimes. So it's, we can say, a part of sovereignty is also a sovereign responsibility. So it's sovereign responsibility of state to protect populations on its territory. However, there are some states that are either unable or unwilling to protect populations. So under Pillar 2 of responsibility to protect, if state is for some reason unable to protect populations on its territory, either that states lacks capacity, because of lack of development, because of lack of strength of state apparatus, it is obligation of other states to help state who is willing to protect populations on its territory, but is unable to do so on its own. So how can other states help? They can help by capacity building, by financial support. There are various ways, and it's an obligation of other states to help states who are willing to protect and unable to do it by themselves. However, we have situations where states are unwilling to protect populations on its territory or are involved in atrocity crimes against populations on its territory, and there we have Pillar 3 of responsibility to protect. In that case, it is obligation of other states to protect populations on territory of certain state, even against the will of that state. So how can that protection be achieved? It's a long range of measures that can be taken, from sanctions to the use of force. However, it is important that under responsibility to protect, any sort of use of coercion requires that the Security Council authorizes such measures. Now, from theory to practice, how does situation about protection from atrocity crimes look in reality? The situation is grim. Trends are negative. We have increased number of conflicts in recent years. In those conflicts, we have increased number of casualties. And among casualties, we have increased percentage of civilian casualties. So what does that mean? Increased percentage of civilian casualties means that civilians are victims of reckless attacks, where civilians get hurt, and of course indiscriminate attacks are against international law and represent war crimes, and if conducted in a systematic way, they can also represent crimes against humanity, or civilians are deliberately targeted, which then also constitute a war crime or a crime against humanity. Now, in sense of responsibility to protect, what does that mean? It means that neither of those three pillars under responsibility to protect works efficiently to protect populations. There are states that are unable to protect their population because their lack of capacity. We do not have sufficient commitment of other states to support them when they are in need, either through financial assistance or knowledge sharing or capacity building. And finally, we do not, if states do not want to protect populations from atrocity crimes or are targeting civilians, civilian populations themselves, we do not have efficient action on behalf of Security Council, UN Security Council. Why? Because of deep divisions between Security Council members, especially by permanent 5 members of the Security Council. To leave time for discussion, I will just give a couple of bullets on way forward as I see it. I think we need much more solidarity. I think we should strengthen Pillar 2, which means that states who can assist states in need to increase their level of population, that states should invest more in helping others. At the end of the day, it's also saving money and not spending money, because humanitarian action when conflict starts, when atrocity crimes committed, are much more expensive than prevention itself. How to identify situations where states are in need? The best possible opportunity are universal periodic reviews, where a human rights situation in each and every state is periodically reviewed. It's treaty bodies reports. Treaty bodies are specialized bodies consisting of experts who are also reviewing how certain states are respecting their human rights obligations. Why that link between human rights and atrocity crimes prevention? Because of 2 things. Human rights are crucial for structural prevention of atrocity crimes. Certain types of human rights violations, such as, for example, discrimination of identity-based groups or involvement in hate speech, are especially dangerous signs of the increase of atrocity crime spreads. So those human rights violations help us as early warning that there is atrocity crime spreads, and also by systematically addressing and preventing those human rights violations, we contribute to prevention of atrocity crimes. And finally, what's the role of science? What's the role of the scientific community? It is scientists who sit in expert UN bodies. They can contribute a lot in identifying dangerous deterioration in sense of human rights violations, which are increasing atrocity crimes risks, so they can raise awareness. And finally, let me conclude that we have a couple of courses here in the Inter-University Center that are dealing and trying to address these issues. One of them is a course where I am co-director, and it's called Human Rights and Atrocity Crimes Prevention. So, for example, last year we had our last course involved some participants from 30 states. We had a top UN official in charge of atrocity crimes prevention, special advisor of Secretary General on responsibility to protect. And for the next course, we will be having literally all living mandate holders of the title of Special Advisor of Secretary General for responsibility to protect. It will be 4 of us. We'll have conference preceding the course, where we will have at this course a combination between leading academics dealing with human rights and atrocity crimes prevention, as well as practitioners. So we are expecting a couple of UN high officials. And let me also conclude that there are positive signs, because scholarship funds for the participants, in sense of participants of the course from countries at risk of atrocity crimes, have been established, and we hope to involve also participants from these countries, which usually do not have means and resources to participate on their own. And of course, the conference and the course will also be used to launch also projects where we will be leading, we will be addressing the issue of human rights and atrocity crimes prevention. Thank you very much for your attention.
Professor Simonovic, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, the first one this morning, starting a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions, I hope. We have just under 15 minutes for discussion and questions. For the participants here in this room, for technical reasons, we need to use these microphones. So please wait till one go to and then start the discussion. And with this, I open the floor.
Thank you for the presentation. This is Probation. What I was most focused on was capacity building, because you talked about that as one of the ways that other countries can help countries that have gone through a conflict in order to establish institutions and work towards peace building. And I was looking specifically at the case of East Timor and Kosovo. And just looking at that, the approach that international missions, specifically in the case of Kosovo, follow is quite frightening because of the, first of all, bureaucratic faith that they have in the whole issue, and second of all, and most problematic, which then I found in the case of East Timor as well, was instead of building capacities, they were actually importing very incompetent capacities, right? So the whole approach of capacity building was replaced by the capacity importation, if that makes sense. which led to many problems and probably could have been easily prevented. And what's more, one study found that the locals were not only disregarded, but they were seen as incapable and untrustworthy. So what's your take on that? How can we deal with this specific issue? Which is directly related to plus. That's all from me.
Thank you very much. East Timor is very interesting example. The first special representative for Secretary General for East Timor was Kamalesh Sharma, the Indian ambassador, and he was a friend of mine. And we discussed how to address the crimes committed in East Timor and how to provide for justice. And Kamalesh told me in a conversation, he asked me, do you know how many East Timorese do we have who had some experience either as criminal law lawyers or prosecutors or judges? And I said, well, you know, I do expect that Indonesians were not very keen to train them. So I expect very few, if it's very few, a couple of tens. And he said, no, not a single one. They didn't have a single person who could address crimes committed in East Timor. So we were discussing on how to help to East Timor, not to provide only justice this time, that we have a traveling circus of people with wigs coming and making a couple of cases and sentencing some war criminals, and afterwards packing their suitcases and moving somewhere else. We were discussing how to have something which will be sustainable. So the system that was developed was involving some foreigners, but also some Eastern Timorese. And they were involved in transitional justice processes as well as criminal proceedings. Were those criminal proceedings ideal from point of view of international law standards? No. But they were providing an opportunity for training for East Timorese and to make justice somehow more sustainable. When you are saying that sometimes international community, when providing assistance, is ignoring realities on the ground, I can tell you from my personal experience that you are very right. And I'll give you two examples. The example of prisons in Haiti and justice system in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As Assistant Secretary General, I was visiting main prison in Haiti, and the conditions there were shocking. I've visited many prisons in my life, and this was the only prison where I've seen that all prisoners were naked in the prison. So, I asked, what the hell is going on? Why they are naked? The conditions in prisons was such an overcrowding that it was their free will to be naked, because it increases their chances to stay alive, because it was extremely hot and the prisons were packed. Now, the solution that was offered by international donors was that there would be a new prison build, which would facilitate conditions, make it more humane, and so on. And that was one of reasons for my mission. And I wanted, because I was former Minister of Justice, I know how to look into prison records. I wanted to know what are people in prison for. And when I have gone through that book, I have discovered that 90% of them were there for pre-trial detention. So the solution for Haiti was not building another prison, but changing justice system to reduce pre-trial detentions. So I helped to divert resources from building another prison into reform which would reduce enormous amount of pre-trial detention. I can tell you that people were in pre-trial detention for years without seeing the judge. And that was the problem, at not overcrowding. Overcrowding was a symptom that something is wrong, and a mechanical solution of building another prison would not be a solution. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, when I was Minister of Justice in Croatia, a colleague of mine, Čolak, was Minister of Justice of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he told me that he needed a deep and comprehensive justice reform. Croatia was also, during my mandate, involved in justice reforms related to accession to the European Union. So he knew that I'm very much in reforms. He told me about reforms, and they really were well thought through. And he did manage to find a donor who wanted to finance the reform of prison system. The donor had just one condition. He said, okay, your concept of reform is good, but there is one problem. You do not have good access to justice. We will finance your reform if you double number of courts to ensure better access to justice. So Barisha Čolak told me, you know, they were just transferring their experiences of their legal system to our legal system. I don't think that we need to double the number of courts, but if this is conditioned to get reform finance, okay. So Bosnia doubled number of courts in order to get resources because of justification of access to justice. This donor ran out of resources. And as a consequence of running out of resources, withdrew. So they had to look for another donor. And another donor said, okay, the concept of reform is very good. We have just one condition. You have to reduce your number of courts 4 times because you have too many courts. They are too small. There is no specialization in the courts dealing with administrative law cases, civil law cases, criminal law cases. So Bosnia and Herzegovina, after doubling number of their courts, reduced their number of courts by 75%. It's just an illustration that in addition to lack of willingness to disburse financial resources, it's sometimes also unwillingness to invest in understanding the environment. And just I don't have more time for more detailed explanations. That's the reason, for example, why reforms failed in Afghanistan. Because we, international community, was investing incredible amount of resources, but not really looking into realities on the ground. The use of resources should be understanding not only the shortcomings of national system, but understanding what works, and then understanding that society, its needs, building on what works in that society, and which means more open-mindedness than preconceived ideas of what other societies need.
Thank you very much for your interesting and extensive answers, Professor Simonovic. We have time for one more question. I just kindly ask you to stick to the time. We have 3 minutes for the question and the answer together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation, and of course your experience tells us everything. My question would be, Well, Croatia is, at least to my understanding, one of the best examples how to transform an old system of prison or pre-trial detention into quite modernized system one. So this includes sometimes also reducing of number of courts, which to my understanding is not the right thing to be done, because many countries, like for example Albania right now, they has just adopted a new map of judiciary system, and they reduced all appellate courts, and they provided just one appellate court for the entire Albania, which is going to trial all pre-trial detention cases in one single court, which is going to include also a lot of economic implications and also security complications for the transportation of people under pre-trial detention, etc. So my question would be, what was the most important thing that Croatia has done to reduce the number of pre-trial detention, which is significantly reduced in recent years, in terms of justice reform, let's say?
I would say that three elements were crucial. One of them is to eliminate short-term sentences. For short-term sentences, we instead, when changing criminal law, we introduced other penalties, not serving sentences for 1 month, 2 months. Instead, those were mostly replaced by financial sanctions. Secondly, it's the use of probation, which means that you are not, after committing certain crimes, you are not immediately sent to jail, but you are supervised by legal authorities for a certain period of time, and if you behave properly, you may avoid serving the sentence. And third is encouraging judges to use more probation. So changing the law was not enough. We had to change mentality of judges. Judges are quite often conservative, and there was a fear, if you don't send someone who committed a certain crime, if you don't send him in prison, but instead put him on probation, if that person commits another crime, you would be, as a judge, accused of being accomplice in doing that. And that mentality is wrong. Sometimes you need to take some risks. If in 90% of cases, introducing probation proved beneficial, and in 10% something bad happened, well, then it's just bad luck. The same applies to giving people who are detained leaves or weekends out of jail. Our judges, when I became Minister of Justice, were extremely conservative, and the directors of penitentiaries were extremely conservative in granting the possibility to spend a day out of prison or to visit a family for weekend and so on. Why? Because if something bad happens, then you are to be blamed. And there was such a mentality in our justice system. So what is the result? If you have somebody who committed a crime, and if you cage that person like an animal for years without having any contacts with the world outside, then when that person comes out, it's very likely that we will have cases of recidivism. If you take a chance and try to keep them in touch with their families, with society, you are taking some risks, but if those risks are taken with a lot of understanding particular individual circumstances, you achieve better social results.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Simonovic. Thank you for your inspiring speech, and thank all participants and of course you for the great discussion on this very sensitive topic on the responsibility to protect on the mass atrocities. Thank you. Thank you. For our next speaker, we are very honored to have Professor Snežana Ričanavžija with us. She is a rector of the University of Rijeka. She is full professor at the Department of Philosophy, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. She is an expert in social philosophy, epistemology, and applied ethics. She has assumed the role of an expert in numerous national and international committees, advisory boards, and higher education bodies in strategic management and leadership. Allow me, Snežana, to say only shortly what I think is so many roles you have, but one is very important for me. She is actually the Woman of the Year 2022 this year, and I congratulate you in the name of the conference team, in the name of Inter-University Center at the University of Zagreb.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. So I felt just a bit embarrassing. Thank you, Goran, for inviting me. I'm so pleased, to be at least via Zoom with you. Of course, regretting not to be with you in person in Dubrovnik. I would like, to share my screen. I prepare. I think that I will be more effective if I share and I pass my presentation. I don't know whether you can see it.
Yes, see it.
Yeah. So the title of my presentation is actually the universities as the lighthouses of democracy, social justice, and peace. So more about the academic community. So just to see what happened. So here is the plan of my presentation. I will try to skip. I'm very much aware of the time, and I will skip some slides, but it is important for me just to share with you the main ideas. So in the first part, I would like, just to mention what is actually the European values, and that the peace we are talking about, the future of peace is the one of the crucial European values, of course, the global values, but the values of the Europe as such, not only peace, but democracy and social justice. The second, in the second part, I would like, to talk, to share with you my ideas that we live actually not only in the crisis of democracy and the threat of peace, but in the crisis of enlightenment. And I would like, to share with you some ideas of what I mean on the culture of ignorance. And in the third part and the final, I would like to conclude with my ideas about what is the role of universities in this crisis of democracy and enlightenment. So the first part, the Guernica, is not, of course, here coincidentally, but the purpose. I would like to start with the Treaty of Lisbon, the Treaty of European Union, and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, where actually the European values as the values that Europeans define to have in common, and which is actually transcend the national and the state identity, there is defined. It is the dignity, the freedoms, the equality, the solidarity, citizens' right to vote, and the justice. But more usually, we associate all these values, shortly as the values of human rights, liberal democracy, and the rule of law. So I would like also to mention here, the idea of European political mentality. I would like to rely on the Habermas and Derrida's six values, actually 6 elements of European political mentality they mentioned in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in 2005. it is the secularization, multilateralism, welfarism, trust in the state and skepticism about market, realistic expectations about technological progress, and a low threshold of tolerance to use of force. Why I mention that? I mention that because behind of the European ideas and the European political mentality is actually the European idea. The European idea, according to my opinion, and not of course only mine, is derived from the age of Enlightenment and republicanism. The intellectual tradition of European cosmopolitanism and federalism of Leibniz, the concepts of universal republic of Christian Wolff, and perpetual peace of Immanuel Kant. Actually, I all mentioned that because I would like to say that there are two pillars of European idea. The first is the peace, harmony, and mutual respect, so the political and ethical values, and the other is the epistemic, relating with the knowledge, with the science, enlightenment, public reason, and the rule of reason. And where we are now, I think that European values of peace, democracy, and social justice, deeply rooted, of course, in European idea and European political mentality, are under a most serious threat at this very moment. So just to share with you a few illustrations, this is the nation in transit that actually registered last year that the anti-democratic turn. So they register that attacks on democratic institutions are spreading faster than ever in Europe and Eurasia. Also, the freedom in the world, so the topics of freedom, the democracy is under siege, so it is actually registered that democracy's defenders sustained heavy new losses in their struggle against authoritarianism. Also, in this year, the report that that registered the global expansions of authoritarian rule. So the global freedom faces a dire threat. Also, report about the human rights, authoritarianism, and the question mark on the issue whether the Democrats can, answer properly. Just a map, the global freedom status. You can see here the green area that is actually the free countries, and the violet and yellow that is actually partly free or not free. And even worse, the situation is when we are looking at trends here. So the situation is worse and worse. So this is the 16th consequent year in which we notice a kind of decline in democracy, freedom, and human rights. So when you're looking, the change in democracy score, you can see that we have the steepest declines ever in Poland, Hungary, Serbia, and the other European countries. Democracy index, I do not want to bother you with more with that, but also the same, so the percentage of people living in the democratic systems today is below 50%. Some figures just to illustrate this kind of consequent decline in democracy score is very, very important to be mentioned here. I do not mention here, the situation now, the war in Ukraine, and that actually, this is the article from 15 days before the Ukraine won't be rebuilt in a day. So this is the great challenges. So my first conclusion here is that we live in a crisis of democracy. Freedom and democracy indexes actually indicate evident trends of diminished freedoms and democracy, a dark time for human rights, and the tendency to undermine the institutions that protect peace and social justice. But I would like also to share with you my idea that this crisis of democracy is correlated with the crisis of enlightenment, that we live in a kind of culture of ignorance, What I mean on the culture of ignorance, the pseudo-scientific movements, freedom festivals, anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, creationism, conspiracy theories, climate change deniers, and like. We live in the time in which the skepticism about science is actually rise every day. And it is correlated with political ideologies, religion, moral statements, and the possession of information about science. With the anti-intellectualism, we can detect it, disparagement of book learning, abandonment of institutions and hard-won standards of knowledge that have brought us the living conditions we enjoy today, and the trust in shaped opinion over expertise. This is the crucial. So we live in culture of ignorance that actually discounts the value of knowledge and facts. And when I'm talking about ignorance, I'm not talking only about uninformed beliefs or decisions or the factual ignorance, but I'm talking about the evident disregards for rational and responsible decision-making, a lack of awareness about cognitive and evidential limitations, radical intellectual egoism. So this is the normative ignorance. The culture of ignorance is characterized by the ideology of alternative facts. There is no objective facts. There are always alternative facts. Everything is only a matter of interpretation and perspective. This is the culture of fake news, culture of amateurism against expertise. We live in cacophony of unfounded opinions. So this is, according to me, the Nicola actually gives us the good quote. The culture of ignorance reflects an elevation of will over reason, the loss of credible concept of objectivity, and the radical change in democratic epistemology. Ignorance actually becomes an ideology. That is the problem. It's not, the question that we live in a kind of ignorance, but there is a strong claim for legitimacy of private privileged insights into the real truth. Insiders' knowledge of conspiracies, information available only to the initiated, the truths revealed to individuals. There are a lot of causes behind the culture of ignorance. I do not, of course, have, I cannot enter in more detail, but just to mention, polarization caused by partisan political ideologies and practices, the trial of fundamentalist religion, postmodern deconstructions of institutions, the conflation of news and entertainment, the misdirected attempts to offer balanced coverage by the media, the explosive mixture of cognitive biases and social media, echo chambers, and the other phenomena, the corruption of pure science by sponsored research and profit motives, the silence of the rational centers, and many, many others. This is a very complex phenomena. But I just want to stress here that the culture of ignorance is actually the symptom of the new crisis of enlightenment. You can see here some paintings and pictures of the famous people who actually spoke about that. For instance, the Goethe, who said, "There is nothing more frightening than ignorance in action." Or Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam, what is the most harmful influence upon man? Surely it is ignorance. And like I say, the quotation I use oftenly from Emma Goldman: the most violent element in society is actually ignorance. So my second conclusion is that the crisis of enlightenment is correlated with the crisis of democracy. The intellectual crisis of enlightenment at the end of the 18th century was caused by the resistance to science and reason. And we have, at this very moment, in the 21st century, the same crisis, the new crisis of enlightenment. And my final part about the universities. So this is, let us say, my area at this very moment. I think that on the declarative level, on the level of strategies, there is a lot of things actually have been attained. So for instance, I have to mention at first the Council of Europe, the huge and the perfect, beautiful project, the reference framework of competencies for democratic culture. So this is, like I say, Department of Education is completely concentrated on these democratic competencies. A lot of publications, and now, the huge project, the Global Cooperation for the Democratic Mission of Higher Education. I do not want to read all of this, but just to mention that we signed, I was pleased and honored to be there, the Vienna Statement, 3 or 4 years actually ago, before, when we detected the threats for democracy, and we realized that universities have the responsibility to engage in that. Also, in 2020, the Rome Ministerial Communique, for the first time, actually mentioned, that universities need to be active and proactive, and in promotion of democracy, democratic competencies, and the rule of law. So as you can see, actually, that we need to mobilize the higher education area, need to mobilize, all their resources to attain sustainable, cohesive, and peaceful Europe. So this is the main values, inclusiveness, innovation, and interconnectedness. Also, the biggest European university associations said to us, this is the vision for 2030, that we need to go outside our walls, our university walls. This year, European Commission published the European Strategy for Universities with four goals. The first is, of course, to strengthen the European dimension of higher education and research. The second is the green and digital transition. The third is that the universities actually need to be strengthened to take their global role. But this is the crucial goal. And I actually take, from this, the title of my presentation, that actually universities need to be the lighthouses of our European way of life, in which is especially stressed, the democratic practices, the engagement on fundamental rights and academic values. So because of that, this is the biggest project of European Commission is the project of the European universities, the key pillar of the European education area. This is the vision for 2025. The idea is to improve the excellence, of course, but also to bring Europeans together. So there is the very clear idea that universities at the European level, that universities need to be more engaged in the overcoming the crisis of enlightenment and the crisis of democracy. I would like to skip this because I'm aware of my time, and I just want to share with you some ideas from my philosophical background, actually how to do that. On strategic level, we have actually everything, but how to implement, all these strategies. And this is the idea of the universities as the anchor and institutions. We, of course, need to be very critical and self-reflective and consider why universities actually fail to successfully do what they are supposed to do. Educate students to be ethical, empathetic, engaged, democratic citizens, and advance knowledge for the continuous betterment of the human condition. So we are in very privileged, we at the universities are in very privileged situation in which we can attain and be engaged in partnership. It's easier for us with the government, local government, national government, with the private sector and community-based organization. We are in the privileged situation to revitalize local neighborhoods and schools. And the research universities actually are the most central, because they are actually the most intensive, they are the most intensive production of the new ideas, of the new knowledge. So I would like to quote here the John Dewey, but you can see that it is 100 years ago, actually, he said, democracy must begin at home, and its home is the neighborly community. So we have now, the Deweyan moment. Now is the critical time to endorse democratic education in theory and action at the universities. And also the higher education institution can no longer try to remain an oasis of the affluence in the desert of urban despair. So our idea is that universities actually need a radical change. The higher education needs a radical change toward democratic civic universities, So, of course, we all practice a kind of community engagement, my university also, but it's not actually enough, Few higher education institutions have the depth and the breadth of engagement required at this time. So we need to advance democracy democratically at our campuses and our university. And actually it means more than just democratic voting for the rectors, for the deans, or I don't know. It actually means, require the participatory democracy and the new epistemology, knowing in action. And I relied here on the famous and very popular philosophers Jonathan Wolff and Donald Schoen, who actually said that we need not applied science, philosophy, epistemology, but engaged. And the difference is that we need to start from the real world problems, the concrete problems, and try to solve and debate about that, not just to apply our knowledge to the community. So my final slide and my final conclusion, the new age of enlightenment assumes democratic civic universities that transform knowledge in action. So in that sense, I actually perceive, the universities as the lighthouses of the European idea. Knowledge and learning are most effectively advanced when people work collaboratively to solve specific, important, real world problems. In forked road situation, a situation that is ambiguous, and we are now there, that presents a dilemma and which possess alternatives. So thank you very much.
Professor Samaja, thank you so very much for this very interesting presentation. We have unfortunately only 4 minutes. Okay, 4 minutes left for questions and.
Sorry.
I already have one here.
Okay, haiku version. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. A couple of points. The first one is your ideas about European ideas and values. I wonder to what extent they are just European and to what extent they are universal is one question. The second one is linked to the ideas of enlightenment. It seems as though you might be informed by some of the people that are talking a lot about the Enlightenment work, in particular Steven Pinker. I see many of your ideas, science, reason, and things like this, which are very important. But of course, his thesis is actually, we're making so much progress with regards to democracy over the years, if we look at it on a longitudinal scale, where it might be the case in recent years we might have had a decline, but if you look at the overall picture, overall, we're making a lot of progress. So that's the second point, just curious your thoughts on that. And the third one about democracy and education, love how you brought in Dewey and Sean and other people like that. Of course, part of the democratic education, following John Dewey, is actually the way in which we teach. So not just teaching about this is democracy, It's how we do the democracy in the classroom. Sorry, it's breaking up here. How we do it in the classroom. So that challenges us as professors, as academics, to look at facilitating this kind of environment in the classroom and not just being teacher-led. It has to be this idea of learning together, participatory, which of course provides a real challenge to people who have a PhD and are there as the fountain of knowledge. So I'm just very curious on your ideas on that also. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Very interesting. Three questions. The first, I agree completely. I focused on the Europe because I'm talking and I know, like I say, better what happens in the European higher education area. So I agree completely. I do not have any to add this. Secondly, I'm just a bit suspicious about the Pinker. I know, and I agree in many things with him concerning the violence and the society, and progress actually we made, of course we made, but now, we cannot escape, we cannot not to register, the crisis of democracy. So I agree, many things actually have been done, but on the other side, it seems to me that we have very, very clear decline, at this very moment. So we hope that we should keep, let us say, the level we attained, but now we are in the regressing. So this is my point. And your third issue is actually the most difficult, how to change the culture, institutional culture at the universities to move to the community engagement in teaching, in research, and in our third mission. It's not easy, So this is the complete, a change in our mentality. So this is because of that there is so many strategic documents on that we actually need to go outside our walls, that we need to think on, that we need to develop non-elitistic idea of the university. So the teach to communicate, to be much more engaged, to find more innovative methods of teaching and learning and research and trying to solve, to listen, the people, what happens in our neighbors, what happens, what is real world concrete problem. So to change, completely a situation, not to produce the knowledge that we would like, to apply on the community. And this is not the community engagement. The community engagement is start from the real world situation, try to hear, to be to develop our non-elitistic, like I say, potential and try to solve the problem and to educate for the democratic citizenship.
Thank you.
Snježana, if you have time maybe for one additional question, we have one additional question and we will allow a couple of seconds, minutes, because we took actually from your in the start.
It's my fault, sorry. So I took so much time, but thank you.
But only 2 minutes, please.
I will try to be very short. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, and thank you for the future in developing democratic values. I wanted to make a small comment about this, you called it like this, rise of ignorance culture. I don't think that maybe the problem with this kind of phenomena is only a problem of epistemological thresholds, because like people during Cold War were subjected to Cold War propaganda. They had very similar behavior and bad quality of information people have today. People seeing like tanks rolling into Prague that were under Soviet propaganda. A lot of them thought that the Soviets were actually liberating Prague in '68, and this was just as bad as a lot of.
I have problem to understand. Can I not hear you? Proper. Sorry.
Okay, no, I will just come to my, I'll just come to my question. I wanted to say that you think that maybe this problem with the culture of ignorance comes mostly also from the high level of isolation and atomization of our society, and people are driven towards these networks, not really because of epistemological reasons, but just because they want to cope with the high levels of isolation in modern society.
Yeah, thank you very much. So sorry not to hear, but I suppose that I catch, you know, the crucial moment. Of course, I agree completely with you that the reasons behind the culture of ignorance is not epistemological alone, you know. So I mentioned that it is actually the very complex phenomena that actually has, you know, some political, ethical, societal, and wider sense, and epistemological, so let us say, reasons. So you mentioned the isolation and atomization of our society. I agree, of course, but you know, this is just, you know, the one element of the wider picture. So we have the situation you mentioned of the social media, you know, the situation of the echo chambers there, you know. So the people live in their, you know, virtual realities, you know, completely in their bubbles there, you know, and they're actually, because of the you know, they're extremized there, you know, radicalized there, you know, completely, you know, discussing, you know, with the people who thinks actually the same, you know, as they, as he or she actually thinks. So the many reasons are behind, you know. One of them, I can agree, is a kind of isolation, you know, not the proper communication, engagement between the people. But I'm not sure that I completely understand what do you think about the atomization and individualization. I think that this is a complex phenomena that actually embrace, you know, of course, political, societal, cultural, and the other reasons.
Thank you, dear Rector Pix-Magia. Thank you, dear Snezhana, for your inspiring speech on the universities as the lighthouses of value, democracy, social science, social justice, and peace. Thank you for your direction, how to improve our academic systems and how to get back public trust in science and universities. Thank you.
Thank you, very kind of you, Goran. Thank you all for your attention.
And we are very delighted to have with us Domagoj Hajduković, a member of the Croatian Parliament since 2011. He is in his fourth mandate and still a young politician. In the moment, he is chairperson of European Affairs Committee, member of Foreign Affairs Committee, member of Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee, and member of Committee on Human and National Minority Rights. He is very active on European level as well, the member of delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, among others, his European roles. Domagoj will talk today about a very important topic on rethinking EU role in the global peace building in the new world order after 24 February 2022. Domagoj, the floor is yours.
Thank you again, Professor Banda, for this flattering introduction. I know I look youngish, but I've been around for some time and in politics as well. I suppose that I may be a definition of what homo politicus is. I've been in politics for over 20 years, local level, now on national level. So yeah, as you rightfully said, EU and foreign affairs are one of my focuses since the beginning of my political engagement. And indeed, after the 22nd of February, the world is not the same. So I choose the mic.
Please.
Sure.
Those who are on Zoom can't hear very well.
Right, I hope that we can hear each other now. So, after the end of February this year, the world is not the same when it comes to international relations, when it comes to the established dogmas, so to say, of doing business in international environments. And
Right, we have solved the technological issues. So, I suppose it is not only good, but vital to talk about the roles that institutions and organizations such as the EU will have to take in this, what we have so pretentiously called new world order. But something definitely new is about. Just since I'm a historian by profession, just a few words about the EU project that I'm sure that you are aware, but I think that we need to underline. EU as such is actually a peace project, which I think is relevant for the discussions that we will have this week. So it was founded as an idea after the Second World War. So it was conceived by actually a French foreign minister during the 1920s, although at that time it wasn't such a big idea. But during the Second World War and all the atrocities that happened, the question arose how to organize Europe in a way to avoid future conflicts after the war. And I'm sure you know that Winston Churchill was the first one to bring up the idea in 1943. His radio address to the nation, he called it the Council of Europe. And later in Switzerland, when he called for the United States of Europe. And indeed, this Council of Europe did came to materialization. We still have the Council of Europe as the oldest pan-European organization, which most European countries, almost all European countries are members of, with the exception of Belarus that never was a member, and Russian Federation for obvious reasons. But in any case, this started a wave, I would say, of intergovernmental organizations in Europe with the goal of preserving peace and furthering cooperation between the states as opposed to competition. So we had the European Common Steel Community, European Community, and finally, after Maastricht, European Union. Now, when we talk about the European Union and indeed the European Community, since its beginnings, it was faced with the challenges of keeping peace on the continent. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, of course, the European Community at the time, their alignment was clear. So Western-oriented capitalist societies. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they were faced with the first actually challenges when it comes to peacekeeping, but also societal development, with the east of Europe being now open and ready for change, ready for social transition. Unfortunately, what is called the Yugoslav succession wars have demonstrated all the failings of the European community at the time and their inadequacies in coping with such large challenges. I think I don't have to remind you, especially those who are from Croatia or from the former Yugoslav republics, about all the initiatives the European community had, trying to preserve peace, trying to broker a peace agreement, but unfortunately it all failed until the US involvement and the EU involved. Now, why is that so? Why was the European community at the time, why it failed so miserably? Have they learned anything out of this failure? And what are the challenges and why is it so that the European Union is not completely efficient in this respect even now? When talking about that, we have to look into peculiarities of the European Union. So it is not a confederation, it is not a federation, it is not a state. So what is it? It's a kind of hybrid system between supranational and intergovernmental decision making. It looks complicated. Just by saying this, it reveals how complicated that system is. So when it comes to supranational level, you have European Parliament and European Commission. European Parliament is directly elected, and European Commission that is elected by the Parliament. And when it comes to intergovernmental level, you have the Council of the European Union. Of course, the Council of the European Union, according to the treaties that are still in effect, has the biggest say, so to say, in all decision makings and can block decisions.
So one can say that the intergovernmental level still plays a major role, which is challenging, especially in the world when you have to make rather quick decisions, and especially when you know that the unanimity is required to pass any decisions. So, because of the stated facts, many academicians, but also politicians, have been asking themselves, where is Europe going? Europe as a peace project today. And the answers have not always been simple ones. It went so far that the European Union organized a conference on the future of Europe that is a historic project. The first project when actually the European Union asked their citizens what do they want, expect from the Union, and where do they see the Union in the future. This is an unprecedented project, and if we bear in mind that the European Union was always top to bottom project rather than the bottom to top. It was always the elites that actually dictated the pace of the European cooperation and integration, not the citizens and not the public. And the conference ended this year on the 9th of May, the Day of Europe, and the results it produced are rather peculiar, I must tell you. So, the conference had its difficulties, the selection of the citizens that will participate in the plenum and so on. I don't wish to bore you with these details, but we can discuss them if you want. But in certain respects, the conference also touched on the EU's role as a global player. Since we must say that if we are to be completely honest, the EU is not a global player as such, or as we would think of a country that is a global player yet in the world. So most of the suggestions and recommendations by the citizens actually involve the changes of the treaties, which there is no political will to do at the time. But nevertheless, the citizens want to see the European Union more engaged when it comes to global issues, especially promotion of human rights, and it went so far as to say that Europe should not buy, for example, oil or gas from the countries or regimes that are undemocratic. So, rather novel approach, I would say, at least when it comes to foreign policy. But the main issue still remains the unanimity of decision-making and the fact that the European Union, as it is not a state or federation or confederation even, has no foreign policy of its own. Yes, it has some, let's say, general markers or general outlines what it would like to achieve, but nevertheless, the foreign policy of the European Union still remains 27 foreign policies of member countries, which sometimes overlap and complement each other, but sometimes are in conflict. Just to give you an example, the conflicting views and approaches how to deal with the Russian Federation after the aggression on Ukraine. For example, Poland and the Baltic states that call for a much stricter stand, and Hungary, for example, that advocates a more lenient stand towards the Russian Federation. But the definite thing is that in the new world, so the new world order as I would call it, we also face the challenges to multilateralism, not only in the European Union, as it is a multilateral project, but also to the UN, Council of Europe, and many other multilateral organizations. With the climate in the society that is created that states should be more cling to their own sovereignty, put their welfare and their interest first rather than to think cooperatively and cooperate in order to reach positions that will benefit all the factors involved. So definitely multilateralism is in crisis, and European Union is not an exception. And indeed, the COVID crisis and the Ukrainian crisis have shown that still there is a lot to do when it comes to EU foreign policy and then EU role in the peacekeeping on the continent, but also globally. So there is a lack of solidarity, unfortunately, a rise of populist politicians that advocated secession from the European Union. Unfortunately, we had one such secession by the UK, and the future will tell whether it was a good decision or bad. If you ask me my personal opinion, it was a bad decision in the long run, but still, it remains to be seen. Unfortunately, the multilateral organizations have failed to do what one of their main goals was, and that is to prevent the conflicts between the member countries. The European Union in this respect was successful. We must say that. There were no conflicts as yet between the members of the EU, especially not armed ones. But let's say UN or Council of Europe or many other organizations have failed in this respect. It goes even so far that the Council of Europe has a subcommittee that deals with the mediation between member countries that are in conflict. For example, Azerbaijan and Armenia, or Russia and all its neighbors, and so on. When Russia was a member. But okay, those are deficiencies, those are the peculiarities, but what is the Union role in the long run? So until recent developments, the Union's approach to the problem was to finance the social development and economic development indeed, and to promote cooperation in its neighborhood in order to facilitate peace. I suppose we would call that some kind of soft power. So you had the pre-accession funds, you had projects like Eastern Partnership, which were aimed to improve the human development index, to promote education, to promote cooperation, exchanges, and so on. And it was believed that it is enough. It can facilitate sufficient stability in order to avoid wars and actually contribute to the culture of peace. Unfortunately, the developments we have witnessed in the last year, but also maybe in the last decade, have proven that this is just not sufficient. That we need other engagement, or rather engagements, in order to preserve peace and stability. And one of such engagements is indeed participating in multilateral organizations that deal more or less successfully with such issues like UN or NATO, but UN specifically because of its peacekeeping missions and so on. And indeed, Croatia perhaps has this is very immodest of me to say, but has something to contribute on the issue, because the only successful UN mission on reintegration of occupied territory happened here in Croatia, the peaceful integration of Danube Basin in the east of Croatia. And finally, what the European Union should think about in the future is the formation of the joint European armed forces. So we have something similar today. Well, those are action groups rather than really what we could call an army or a joint armed forces. But joint armed forces should exist, in my opinion, for two reasons. One is deterrent, so that the European Union can react as a whole quickly when security is threatened. And the other is peacekeeping involvement. This is maybe more relevant for the discussions today. The peacekeeping involvement that should complement the UN, and other peacekeeping forces that of multilateral organizations that already do it. So to wrap up, and I look forward to your interventions. The European Union should retain its role in the peace promotion in the future. The investment in academic research, in academic exchanges, is one of the ways to go. And as I said yesterday, maybe a center like this, we are today here, could be one way of facilitating those exchanges. Because the world has divided again, whether we want to admit it or not, between those that are more democratic and those more autocratic. And the exchanges, in my view, of academicians can only benefit the societies in question, both those democratic and autocratic. And finally, because the democracy is in crisis, I believe that the academia should be more involved, as I said yesterday, in promotion and development of democracy as such. Because unfortunately we don't have any alternatives. Unfortunately, it depends how you look at it. We don't have any alternatives yet. So democracy has its flaws, but and has its challenges, and is in crisis in a certain respect, as the lecturers today already mentioned, but still is the best system.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kudukovic, for this really interesting presentation and ideas. We have 7 minutes left for discussion, so I kindly ask all the participants interested to raise their hand.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation on this extremely important subject. I would like to ask you on your view on this consensus rule you were mentioning. And do you see a really effective and strong foreign policy happening with this rule in place, and this all this talk of reform of the that rule? Do you see it happening in foreseeable future?
Should I answer right away, or should I reflect on the question? Okay, so yeah, the consensus issue has been issue that is debated in the political circles as of late, especially. And as a one interesting episode I would like to share with you is the speech of Prime Minister Sanchez on the Europe Day that he delivered in the Senate of the Kingdom of Spain on the 9th of May this year. And he said that he will try to implement as much as possible the conclusions and recommendations of the Conference on the Future of Europe without interventions in the treaties. So Wilbur is really enthusiastic about renegotiating treaties and rethinking Europe in such a, let's say, political and formal way. But when it comes to decision making, he said one thing which is relevant for two, because of the two underlined facts. So he said that after the European Union exceeds the number of 30 member states, it should reconsider the consensus or the unanimity when it comes to decision making. Why is this important? First of all, he is definitely a proponent of enlargement, if he puts it like this, which I completely agree with. In the European project is not complete until all the states that share the values and want to be the members are not in. And secondly, the unanimity in the really is becoming a problem. A system needs to be developed in order to protect the interest of all the countries, but also to introduce something that would not be really always a uniform stand, because it is very time consuming and you have to put a lot of effort into reaching such decisions, which are usually compromise, which is good in a sense. But sometimes you cannot have compromise, like the crisis in Ukraine and the sanctions. In order to give effect, you have to be unanimous and uniform in this stance. So a system needs to be developed in order to avoid, the biggest countries and the most influential countries, economic and political-wise, like France, Italy, Spain, Germany, to be able to make all the decisions without consulting some smaller member states. But this is not unheard of. This is not something that is not known or not tried in practice. So definitely in the, let's say, foreseeable future, this approach should be thought about and reformed.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Just a quick question about joint armed forces. How much more can you tell us about that? For example, to what extent will it differ from NATO, UN? How much will they collaborate? Very curious to hear more about this.
I am as well, because this is just this is still an idea that is being developed. But okay, it has its name. It is called Eurocorps, or should be called Eurocorps. There are, as I said, kind of first moves towards that, and that those are the joint operation units. However, with the war in Ukraine, I think that even Eurocorps may be in question to a certain extent, because one of the biggest victims of the war in Ukraine is actually NATO. NATO, was becoming an organization that most people thought obsolete because of, the peace on the continent, the major, let's say, challenger being the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. So many people question, why do we need NATO anymore? We don't see any, security threats, immediate security threats that would require such an alliance, rather expensive alliance, in order to keep peace and stability. But after the war, NATO is becoming big again, so to say, colloquially. Even when the two newest additions, Sweden and Finland, clearly shows that this is a new moment in the international security cooperation. Finland that pursued neutrality so far, because they had a very difficult and still have a very difficult neighbor. So their view was, expected to be neutral, try not to anger Russia, and have, strong armed forces in the case of worst scenario, which they always believed was a possibility. But they have abandoned such forces. So to put it in a nutshell, maybe to reserve some time for other questions. Eurocorps project was big at a certain point because European Union was always looking to be less dependent on the US and more to rely more on its own resources. However, with the war, I think that this project may transform or even be scrapped because of more reliance on NATO and more and more of my colleagues actually believe that NATO is the only thing that can keep Russia as it is today at bay.
We're out of time, so very briefly.
Very briefly. So last week I was talking with a representative from the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the information service in Berlin, Germany, and he said that one of the greatest problems with common security in Europe is that Europeans are ready to put material resources in common, but not the information structures yet. So whatever common security structure Europe might be, there will be the problem that always gonna guide intervention in terms of intelligence and information. Like, do you discuss in the political world this issue on how security structures would access European intelligence and the relation to national level?
Thank you for the question. I'll also try to be brief. This is a topic of discussion, although not for European affairs as such, but within the framework of European affairs, together with the European Parliament, there is a parliamentary gathering called the Conference on Defense and Security. That happens twice a year and gathers representatives of foreign affairs and defense and security committees of the national parliaments. And it is an issue. However, as far as to my knowledge, the common intelligence agency was never really discussed because there is a certain reluctance to create a common structure for such operations. Why? Because there are doubts that certain certain member countries would play fair in the sense that they would not share the information with other parties, so to say. I can tell you in detail what I mean maybe during the coffee break. But in any case, this was not considered. So far, the European Union has relied mostly on national armies and intelligence agencies. And in my view, after the Brexit, France has the most formidable army in the European Union. And before the Brexit, actually, MI5 and MI6 were the most developed security agencies that we had in the European Union. Nowadays, it's difficult to speculate which agency would that be. But kind of natural leaders, if you ask me, but it's just my personal opinion, would be French when it comes to the conventional army and nuclear weapons, deterrence, sorry. And UK would be in the covert and intelligence agencies if they were a member. Nowadays, I think that needs to be considered.
Thank you, dear Mr. Gajdovic. Thank you, dear Donovan, for your very inspiring speech on the EU role in the global peace building in the new world order. We are living in the new world paradigm. Thank you for your very great directions how to improve EU role in the new global society. Thank you once again. And now we are very happy to have with us Professor Alexander Zidanšek, Professor of Physics at Faculty of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, University of Maribor, researcher at the Josef Stefan Institute and Secretary General of Josef Stefan International Postgraduate School. Professor Zidanšek is an active in solid-state experimental physics and in research of renewable energy. He has been involved in a number of national and international research and education projects in solid-state physics, security, and in sustainable development. He is a member of the Club of Rome since 2005, president of Slovenian Association of the Club of Rome since 2011, and a member of the World Academy of Arts and Science last 10 years. Professor Zidanšek will discuss today a topic, the pathway to the peace in Europe. Alexander, floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Goran, for a very kind introduction. Hope you can hear me, and greetings from rainy Slovenia to the beautiful city of Dubrovnik, which I visit often and always admire also its long history of peace. You know, there were like empires waging war all around it, and there was peace in Dubrovnik. So it's obviously we can learn a lot from them. So as today's dangers are so grave that this conventional approach to peace is too slow, we must really think outside the box. So I will share a very short PowerPoint, which I prepared. I actually don't like PowerPoints because they take attention away from the speech, but in this case, I think it will help. So here we go. Okay, you already made the introduction. So I would start with the history of science in Southeast Europe, which is actually a good example of how neighboring countries can cooperate and prevent peace. So for example, in Slovenia, we have 4 neighbors. There is only one neighbor with whom we never had a war, that is Croatia, because we have good cooperation with them. And then I would talk a little bit about this Dubrovnik Republic and the lessons learned from them, about the current challenges that are really grave and urgent, and we must act really decisively, and then about conclusions, what to do and what we recommend. And of course, I would like to give the acknowledgement. There is a book that we are just finishing with Ivo Schlaus and Uroš Cvelbar, and we have had discussions for over a year and a half, where a lot of these ideas came up, and some of them are in the form of solutions, some of them are in the form of ideas, and I will be really happy to share this with you, and maybe we can find also some better, more faster workable approaches. If we start with this history, you know, here there was like a joint country in the previous century called Yugoslavia, which had a nuclear ambition. They wanted to develop nuclear arms. So in Belgrade, there was the Institute Vinča, established by Pavle Savić in 1948. Then in Slovenia, it was established by Anton Peterlin in 1949. He was supervisor of my supervisor, so like 2 generations before me. And then in Zagreb, it was a year after that, Ivan Supek established Ruđer Bošković Institute. So this is actually, I think, the picture of its future. Bottom right is our Jožef Stefan Institute, and on the top you have the Vinča Institute. So how did this start? Already in the Middle Ages, we had like people who were working with science, like Andrej Perlak from Slovenia. He was very important at Vienna University, a doctor. Then Jan Žiga Valentin Popović, he was born very close to my place. So by the time that my great-great-great-grandfather was farming on his vineyard, the Žiga Popović was doing studies all over, he was traveling all over the world. And Ruđer Bošković, he lived at the same time and in Dubrovnik, and he was one of the leading scientists at the time. Then we had Juri Vega in Slovenia, and you can see here Ruđer Bošković, upon him, the institute in Zagreb is named, and he was like one of the biggest successes, I would say, of the Dubrovnik Republic. Then in 19th century, we had Jožef Stefan in Slovenia, Andrija Mohorovičić, Dragutin Gorjanović. So this Jožef Stefan, he is known by Stefan law, Stefan Boltzmann law, black body radiation, and he is actually like the biggest Slovenian physicist in 19th century. So we follow his lead. And then, of course, we also had in these countries like Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, very important people like Mihailo Pupin, Varičak, Milutin Milanković, Herman Potočnik, who like designed the concepts of geostationary satellites. And we even had some Nobel Prizes, or a person who didn't want a Nobel Prize, that was Nikola Tesla. Then Friedrich Pregl got the prize, Ladislav Ružička got the prize, Vladimir Prelog. These are people from either Slovenia or Croatia. Some people actually worked in other countries. You see this Nikola Tesla, he was really doing great stuff, like wireless transfer of energy, which would be really useful for tackling today's energy crisis. And energy crisis is actually one of the most important that is leading to many wars and conflicts in the global world. If you talk about Dubrovnik Republic, it started like in 1358 when they gained independence, and then they were independent all the way until the Napoleon's troops entered the city in 1808. So how did they do it? They were doing the trading, so they would just look around who is the strongest, with whom they have to align. They would even pay taxes to the Ottoman Empire, or to later, I think, to the Austrian, but the focus was not on war, but on trade. So they were actually located really nicely to kind of be at the center of this trade from Italy to the Ottoman Empire. And but this is important. This is their motto, actually, which was stated in Latin because that was the language at the time. So they would say, "Non bene pro toto libertas venditur auro." So that means we are not going to sell our liberty for any amount of gold. Okay, I can give the translation. So for all the gold in the world, the liberty is not going to be sold. So the freedom was important to them. It should be important to us today as well. But what is happening today? If we look at the current challenges, we heard about this ignorant culture, and I think it's even more than that. It's like throwaway culture. I have been discussing, like, there are lots of our people here around, even friends, who are like, I don't think they are ignorant. They know all about the virus, that it doesn't exist. The vaccines killed, that they were designed to exterminate humanity. And I have been in discussions with them like for a long time. And after it, apparently all of their arguments were like knocked out. They were even more firmly convinced that all of this is true. So I would not say ignorance. They're well connected, educated, and they still have this strange worldview, which is probably not totally accurate. So we talk about throwaway culture. That means not only that we are throwing stuff away, we buy something, we throw most of it away, but also throwing people away after you don't need it, precariat, people without work, people excluded. And this is not good. And another issue that is not good are these weapons of mass destruction, when you can destroy the earth like, I don't know how many times, hundreds of times probably, in a moment, like in a couple of hours. And at the moment, there are 58 active armed conflicts listed on Wikipedia. It's true that only one of them is a major war between two countries, there are like 5 others which could count as wars, but they are more border conflicts, like India, Pakistan. It has listed 200 dead people this year, which is something like a major American city which is poorly governed, like Chicago, for example. It has probably more death than India, Pakistan. So the rest are certain insurgencies or drug wars or stuff like that, which is not good, but there is basically one major active armed conflict which has to be stopped. And if you look at this history, you see we have actually been doing quite well after World War II. So World War II is not on the scale on this graph because it would be outside the scale, but it has been going down until about 2000, and then something happened. It's just like something happened, and this early 21st century was not going in the right direction. Yeah, so I will talk a little bit more about this. At the moment, if we look at these current wars, Wikipedia lists actually 3 wars that have over 5,000 dead this year. Ukraine is number 1, and the number is difficult to estimate, but it's somewhere between 30 and 100,000, which is really sad. And then we have Myanmar, which is about 12,000. So this is the second largest, but this could be maybe viewed like a civil war, like Yemen, the same. Still 5,000 dead in Yemen this year, which is really bad. But these are the only 3 wars with more than 5,000 casualties. Then we have next wars like Mexican drug war, war in Maghreb, Boko Haram insurgency, war in Syria is still not over. Nigeria conflicts, the various conflicts also are not really good. War in Mali, Somalia after more than 30 years is still not over. And then we have Afghanistan, which is still bad, and Iraq, Oromo insurgency, Uganda, Congo. So here is the list where you can see the map where it is the worst. So the darker color means the worst situation. And that means that where the situation is bad, something needs to be done. So what? If we talk about this, we heard yesterday, Ivo described this very beautifully, that war is not only useless, it's harmful. So it does more harm to the country that starts than without starting it. If you look like the recent history, it was the Russian Federation that was advancing really fast until 2014, and then they started war. And their economic growth was not benefited by that. So that means if they didn't start the war, they would probably be much richer 8 years later. And now there are like 2 countries that are not benefited by that. But why is it not abolished? It's obvious that it's bad, that it's not useful to the one who starts, but people still start the war. So obviously something more has to be done. And then there is another observation. We have United Nations, and there are 58 military conflicts. And when a major nuclear power attacks a neighboring country, what happens is that Security Council is blocked because they have a veto, which means that nothing is done and people are dying every day, which is not good. But what we can do, one solution is to bring countries to regional associations. In Europe, we have European Union. And okay, Ukraine is now starting the accession negotiations. They actually take a long time, perhaps a little bit overly bureaucratic, because if the situation is grave, it doesn't wait for years or tens of years. The same thing could be done also in Western Balkan. We have 6 countries in Western Balkans which should access the European Union as soon as possible. Then we have the Russian Federation, which should eventually also join the European Union. I mean, that's probably the best way to prevent the wars between countries in that region. Everybody joins the same association, then there is less probability for war. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we as European Union actually offer these countries? Why would they want to join? You know, it was like 10, 20 years ago, it was obvious. Everybody wants to join European Union. But today, the incentive to join is greatly diminishing. The European Union has its own challenges, which means that I believe we need a serious paradigmatic improvement in Brussels, the same as the United Nations needs one. So these international associations also need improvements. I would say great paradigmatic changes are required, and not in the tens of years, but urgently today, because the situation is grave. We are really very short distance away from like those dangers like nuclear Armageddon or something even worse. But there is another way. It's not only this international situation, which is kind of unstable and doesn't really work the way it should, but there is science. Yesterday there was a discussion whether science should be developed also for the military. And I think we should look at the opposite way, not the science for war, science for military technology, but science for peace, which means what science can do to prevent those major military powers from waging wars, from using their violence against their neighbors. And if this is, I don't know, they are throwing bombs, rockets, they are sending biological, atomic, whatever weapons, then you need to have better defenses, like, I don't know, I mean, it's time to think outside the box. For example, there was like famous example when Iran tried to develop nuclear weapons, and there was a virus which destroyed their centrifuges. Not really clear who or what or how sent the virus there. I think it was the Siemens was the technology, but somehow the virus entered, and there was like a major step towards peace, which means that today what we need is such innovative solutions, solutions that would prevent the country that has like nuclear arms, tanks, rockets, artillery, and other people-killing devices to using them. And if they cannot use them, then there is this incentive for war is actually greatly diminished, and there is a higher chance for peace. So this is what I believe we have to consider. So what we do here, I mean, Goran mentioned that I also cooperate with University of Maribor at Jože Stefan International Postgraduate School. I am currently in charge of the study matters. And what we do here is when the student comes, we help them build their purpose and vision in research. So what to do in their research career, at least in the next 5 or 10 years, that would make massive difference to improve the quality of life on Earth, to contribute to resolving environmental, economic, social, energy, food challenges, and in this way contribute to peace and to better quality of life for all. This, I believe, is even more important than strengthening those international associations, which are usually slow, but students can work rather fast, much faster than those slow international institutions. And for the end, I would just like to show a picture that was a message from the Club of Rome when the conflict, when the war in Ukraine started. First, there was a message from Club of Rome, then of World Academy. And at Club of Rome, we said it's not enough that we just stayed by words that war is bad. And so we found this beautiful picture by Alexander Milov and added it to our statement. I believe this is actually the way to include not only science, but also arts, and convince people that this more beautiful world is possible if we all take really grave efforts and do something in this direction. So with this beautiful picture as a message for peace, I would end and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Zidanšek. Thank you very much for your great speech and great presentation. We have 8 minutes left for discussion, so I encourage all interested to give me a signal.
Ivan Maric, Croatian Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I would ask you about the perspectives from Southeast Europe, as you mentioned. You mentioned the great minds from these countries like Tesla, like Potočnik or Ruđer Bošković. This region is often perceived in the West, especially among academics, as an area of conflict, of problems, of something that's beyond the enlightened West. Do you see a change of perspective when you, as a distinguished scientist, say to your counterparts that this area has also brought some minds which inspired the world and which is not that known, and also the contributions to peace and to diplomacy, and as you mentioned, the Dubrovnik Republic, which was in fact before its time, while exchanging diplomatic skills for freedom, for example. Especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, which is one important thing, and Dubrovnik is very mentioned. So I would ask you about that. Do you see the change of perspectives also from Slovenia, Croatia, and so on?
Yeah, thank you for your very nice, interesting questions. And it's very true, all which you stated. Dubrovnik Republic was really ahead of its time. And if you talk about this change in perspective, I already mentioned that Slovenia's only neighbor that it was never in war with is Croatia, which means that in principle we have good relations. Occasionally, you know,
Now we are going to the beach.
About this one.
Yeah. And we will speak, of course, about peace. Yeah. Did you agree or two? Ali nešto se ipak dogodi, njega smo izgubili, ja?
Mislim da smo njega sam izgubili.
Okej.
I'm terribly sorry. It seems like I lost a connection. So what I wanted to add is that the change of perspective. This change of perspective doesn't just happen on its own, but we need to actively take steps to build this new perspective. First, to convince ourselves that we are really advancing ahead, and this might not be easy. The times are such that for the next maybe 5-10 years it will be very tense internationally. We have heard our predecessors about all the challenges that we are facing at the moment, and yet we remember from history that all challenges like that were resolved, and then after that there was a rapid growth, economic, social, scientific. If you look at the world in Europe in 1930s, it would really be a very dark picture. And from 1945, it was like one of the biggest and the best advances of the humanity, probably in the whole human history. It was a peaceful Europe for a long time, and it advanced together with other peaceful nations. A lot of advances in science, in technology, improved the quality of life, reduced the poverty worldwide, and this is what we have to be focused on. So what will happen in the 21st century after we resolve the current challenges? I believe that we are on a great way, and also this Southeast European region has great advantages to offer, both from its rich history like the Dubrovnik Republic and from well-educated people who can contribute a lot both to science, to technology, to art, and the other human endeavor that is necessary to build this better future together. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more, I guess. Hello, Alexander. Can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you.
So, you spoke actually about the history of science in Southeast Europe, and you spoke about the current conflict escalation in the world. Actually, can you help us something with our topic, the main topic? What is the role of academic community in promoting the peace? Is only on academic level, or maybe engaging in politics, maybe engaging in international organization as Club of Rome, as because we miss something that, or we have the feeling that academics are very close to the concentrate on the university level, but they are not active in society level, or not enough.
Yes, this is actually a great question. Thank you. It's always a question of how to best use our time. We are active, so we do so much. We write papers, we write books, we teach students, and then we also have to engage the community. That is at the local level, from local like ecological challenges, then national level, then international level, and there is always a question: which is the most productive use of our time, where we are going to have the greatest effect. Like, for example, if you look at from perspective of physics, there is a transistor. When you just use a small current, that will like shift the big current. So how to do something, or this butterfly effect, the butterfly just waves the wing, and then there is a tornado somewhere thousands of kilometers away, which means how should we actually use this small stuff, small motions, which are not really so small, but they can be significant. And what I believe is that the bottom, if we drill down to the bottom, is the values, the human values, our own values of our students, which they have, but maybe not recognized, and then values of people around in the national leadership, in the international leadership, that perhaps some people have forgotten because of all the pressing issues. There is war, there is epidemics, there is economic crisis, there is energy crisis. So people are solving this crisis and lose the connections to our values. So I believe reminding them about this is one very important task that we have.
Great, thank you. Thank you, dear Professor Danšek. Thank you, dear Alexander, for your very interesting speech on the pathway to peace in Europe. And please allow me to say thank you for your speech, because you give us direction how to get back public trust in science and the universities.
Thank you, Goran. Thank you, Goran. I enjoy the beautiful city of Dubrovnik.
Now we have something about 30 minutes to have coffee, and for the people in Zoom, we will be back in 30 minutes. See you.